Okay, hey, I'm on? You're on. That sounds kind of loud. Is it kind of loud? Just a little bit? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, we're glad to be here. I just want to thank Danny for asking us to be out here. We made these arrangements some time ago, and he asked, will you come out on the 30th and preach? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And then Monday, we were with him for our staff Thanksgiving, and he said, this Sunday is the worst day of the year for traffic. Yes. I said, thank you for make it so special. I said, really? He said, yeah, he said, I don't know, but it is horrific. It has just got to be prepared. I said, okay, we're going to do this. And so we made all the preparations that we need to make. And I just want to tell you that traffic on the eastbound lane of the 10 was just fine. He failed to tell me the problem was westbound. All right. We got here early. We went shopping. But it's really great. Anyway, you know what? Let me tell you something, a story here real quickly before we get started. I guess I've already started, so that's irrelevant now. When Cynthia was up talking about special needs for the Kingdom Kids, let me tell you a real quick story. When we first became Christians back in 1978, and our neighbor 2 doors down had a real significantly, a special needs child, couldn't talk, couldn't communicate, was a sweetheart of a kid, but just hard to control. And Nancy was reaching out to her and asked her to come to church, and she hadn't been to church for some time, and the reason it turned out she hadn't been to church is that the denomination that she was a part of had asked her not to come because her son was disruptive. Her husband was an elder in that church. And Nancy said, you need to bring him. It's going to be great. You're going to love it. So she came. We had our great Kingdom Kids. A number of our students were, even going through special ed, training and getting their degrees in that. And what a delightful kid this was. There were times when there'd be in the middle of a sermon, and Jeff was his name, and he'd come running down the middle of the aisle, making noise, and his hands were going, and it was the coolest thing because everybody just smiled. Things kind of stopped, and the minister would say, hey Jeff, how you doing? And then he'd be followed by a teacher. Come on, we got to get back downstairs. But our neighbor became a Christian. Her husband was a little bit harder line. It took a year or so for him to finally come around, became Christian. They're faithful today in the Chicago church, but it's because of that. It's what we do. It's where we are, and it's a gift that God's given us. So thank you to all the Kingdom Kids teachers and all those that do so much for all of us. That's how we actually came to church the first time, was because our kids were invited to a vacation Bible school. So it's amazing, how God worked through all this stuff and on there. But I want to tell you, it's wonderful being here. I thank you very much. Being a part of this congregation was, in the intimacy that we felt during that year and a half that we were part of this was wonderful. Well, you're counting, right? Oh, sorry. You're looking at me. But it's a joy to be here. And I want to say, I don't know if I've said this, but I want to tell you again, one of the greatest gifts that God's given me, we've been out here 15 years now. When we first came, we came in January. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But in May of that year, a brother named Andy Fleming asked me to. He called me in. He said, "Would you oversee the preteens for the LA church?" I said, "Okay." And he said, "This was in May or March. March, I think it was." He says, "By the way, we've got a camp in July, and nothing's been done." And you're in charge. And so, now I was 53 years old at the time. I'd never been to camp in my life. And I got to tell you, it was, so we went, brother named Delano Stewart and his wife, Nadine, were together. We put that thing together, and boy, I tell you what, the first year was, talk about overwhelming, but we built and God blessed, and it's been there 15 years now. And it's something I never would have expected, but one of the greatest gifts in my life that God's given me. Love your kids. I just want to say thank you for trusting me all those years with your most precious children. They changed my life more than I could ever begin to understand. Driving down here, I mean, where Nancy said, okay, there's the mountains. Like, I know the mountains there. You're driving right past it. It's just like, it's all you can do to, not pull over and start the trip. But it's wonderful. But it's a blessing. We were at a wedding reception last night, and this young man, I saw him in the hall, and he walked away, and then he came back, and he looked at me, and he said, "Are you Grandpa Shark?" I said, "Yes, thank you." It's the better part of me. So, thank you again. And thank you, Danny and MJ, for the love that you've shown us, and all of you that it's meant so much, to all of us. It wasn't a few weeks ago we had a marriage retreat, marrieds. Yeah. Are you still on that high, I hope? Yeah. It was awesome. The Fergusons did a great job. Let's make sure. The one thing that he said, and that I really appreciate, when he talked about Ephesians 5 and the roles of husbands and wives and everything, and at the end of Ephesians he says, after talking about marriage, he said, this is a profound mystery, but what I'm really doing is talking about Christ and the church. Right. And our marriages are to reflect that kind of relationship. What an opportunity that we have to show people in this world the relationship between Christ and the church by just being with us. So important. We cannot take for granted. It's a huge and beautiful responsibility that God's given us. And let's not let him down, with that one. I thought about a story after the marriage retreat. This little boy had gone to his church and went to his, Kingdom Kids, children's ministry, and the teacher was talking about the whole process of the creation, and he was completely enthralled by this thing. And the story that, about having Adam lay down and taking a rib and forming Eve and all that stuff, he was like, wow, that's amazing, and he's telling his parents all about it. Wasn't sometime later his mom came in and she saw him laying on the floor, and he looked kind of troubled. And she said, "Is everything okay?" And he said, "I have this pain in my side. I think I'm going to have a wife." Okay, just to be fair, why did God create Eve? Because he created Adam, he took a look, and he took a step back and said, "I can do better than that." Let me go back a little bit in our life. This is really kind of an interesting time. I thought, what do I want to say after 15 years, getting ready to leave next week? And what do I want to say? If any of you are looking for a 3-point outline, wrong place. My life is still on point 1. So what you got's what you got. But it was funny. It was January, early January of 2000. Nancy and I got a call from Marty Fuqua. Marty and Chris, you may know him, and he's leads another region. He's an elder now in the LA church. But I got a call from him, and he said, "We'd like to see you and Nancy, soon. Could you fly out pretty quick here to LA? We want to talk to you." So we did. we knew that something was coming. You know, it was one of those meetings. And while he was out there, he talked to us about a need in the LA church, and said, we believe that you can fill that need. It's important, and we'd like for you to move to LA. Now, let me give you a little backdrop on this a little bit. We were in the process of, we're in Chicago. That's where we're from. I love Chicago. I never had any intention ever to leave that city. It's part of me. And we were in the process of buying a house. In addition to that, Nancy's parents were living in Florida. They were getting older, their health was declining, and she and her sister had just convinced them to move back to the Chicago area so they could be closer to us. So there's a lot going on. And they talked about the need, they talked about what's going on here that would require that. And we went for a walk and we prayed and we talked. And after a bit we came back and said, okay, we'll absolutely come. 2 weeks later, we were in LA. And it's funny, you think about it now, people say, well, that was pretty radical. And it was challenging. But in a way, that's what we were known for at that time. People giving up everything. What we called a disciple, but what we really believed, someone who will give up everything, go anywhere, be whatever they need to be for God, if that's what God needs you for. That's who we were. I'll never forget with Marty, I looked at him later that evening and I said, Marty, you know what? Nobody's asked me to do anything really hard for a long time. I said, it's good to know where my heart is. Then I'm still a disciple. See, I trust the people, I trust God, and I trust the people that God puts in my life. You may say, well, how do you trust that much? I mean, that's a pretty radical move to make in a conversation. How do you trust people that much? Let me tell you a story. I was an elder in Chicago before I came out here, a younger elder, and it was really interesting because it's funny, people call you when they have needs. That's what we do. And they're looking for insight and advice, and I got a situation going on. What do I do? And there were times when I'd go to bed troubled. What if I'm not giving them? I mean, they're looking to me. What if I'm not doing a good job? What if I'm giving them wrong information? As God would have it, there was a meeting that we had in the Midwest as the Midwest churches were coming together. We were in Kansas City, and I got there for this little conference, and while there, this woman walks up to me and introduces herself and says, hey, John, I've been so looking forward to you coming here. I've wanted to meet you. I said, well, that's nice. And she said, I called you, and I had a situation going on in my life that was pretty significant, and I talked to you about it, and you gave me advice, and I followed the advice exactly, and everything turned out great. I'll be honest, I'm feeling pretty good about myself at that moment, right? What I should have done, humbly, was say thank you very much and walked away and done something else. But I thought, I'm on a roll here. So I said to her, a lot of people call me. I can't, I really don't know. Can you refresh me on this great job that I've done? Can you refresh me and tell me what, so I understand. So she told me the situation, pretty significant situation going on in her life. And then she told me the advice that I gave her. At that moment, all I remember of that moment was the blood draining from my face, perspiration breaking out. I'm thinking, that's the worst advice I could imagine anybody giving anybody. I don't doubt that was what I did, but it was like, I was mortified. All I wanted to do was end that conversation, walk away, and hope that she never told anybody about what just happened. But I learned something really interesting from that, as God does. Here's this woman, I think from what his perspective was, here's this amazing, faithful, godly woman who had been praying, humble, asking for insight, calling people that she was given to trust, in that case me, and presented her needs. I think God's fired up. She's doing everything right. And then he heard my answer. And I picture God going, for you, I'm going to make that work. Just don't call him again, okay? Just. But it was really a significant moment for me. Because I realized it's not about me. I can't be the best all the time. I got to try. Romans 8:28, it says that we know in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Even that. That's the God that we serve. It's the God that we worship. Let me give you some scriptures about this God. Just mention them here. Luke 9:23, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. And Luke 14:33, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. Now, what's interesting about those passages is that in a lot of people's minds defines Christianity. If you become a Christian, you can't do this. You're not going to be able to go here. You can't be with us all this. If you become a Christian, you cannot. Let me put a perspective on those passages. And it's a passage in Matthew 13 and a little story that's one verse long. Verse 44. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all that he had and bought that field. That's it. Here's a story of this guy that's walking through a field. Maybe he walks through there every day, who knows, but one day something catches his eye. And he goes over and takes a look, and he is completely overwhelmed with what he sees, whatever it was. Man, I got to have this. That field doesn't belong to me. I can't just take it. The only way for me to have that is I got to buy it. And so he hides it again, so nobody else finds it. He hides it, and then he goes home, and he's got all these things he's got to figure out. He's got to find out, okay, first of all, who owns it, and what does that field cost? And he finds out the price, and he's a bit taken back. Then he goes home, and he's looking around thinking, man, I don't have it in my bank. I got to sell some stuff. Sell off his animals and sell off his land, and okay, the house. Okay, house, I can sell the house. And he's going through his things. I picture him maybe going through, I'm going to sell this, I can get this much for this, I can get this. Well, and maybe he comes across that heirloom, right? That one that's been passed down for generations. And he's thinking for a second, but he thought, no, it's got to go. And he to get the price of the land, he sells everything. And you picture this guy? Well, I got to sell this. I don't know if I get that. All right, I'll do it. Does that sound like him? The Bible says, in his joy, if I can have this, everything goes. And it's okay, because I get this. Let me flip that around a little bit. Jesus. He's the one walking through that field. He sees a treasure and says, if I can have that, I'd give up everything, including my life. See, that treasure is you and me. Deny yourself, really? Oh my gosh, being a Christian, I got to do this, I got to do that. If we can have what He has for us, what is it you want, Lord? A tenth? That's it? Seriously? I keep 90%? Are you kidding me? That's all? Of course. What else can I do? Of course we're going to move to LA. God has blessed that move so many times over. With you, the camp, so many people that we love so very much. Leaving here isn't easy. But when I look at what God has to offer and what He was willing to do for me, it's, I think sometimes when, you'll read through the gospel accounts and the torturous scene on the cross, Jesus up there bloodied and beaten, and if that's not bad enough, there's people hurling insults at Him, trying to make His emotional death as painful as His physical death. And you get it, and you make eye contact, realizing that He's there because of what you did. We say, I'm sorry. And He looks down through His pain and says, you're worth it. Wow, self-denial, really? Is that really what makes the difference in our life? What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? What if you get all of it? What if you have everything that you ever dreamed of? You know what's hard for us? It's hard for us to see darkness because life is so good here in Southern California. That's really what it is. You go to a third world country, people have nothing. The thought of heaven is pretty good. That's right. We try to make heaven out of what we have. There's a passage, that says you can't serve both God and money. Actually, if you look in some of the older translations, there's another word that it came from. It's called mammon. Might have heard it, but what it means is actually better because it talks about what we have. It's wealth. It's everything. I can't serve both God and be so fired up about everything that I got. Everything that I want. I want a bigger house because this just isn't enough. Oh yeah, financially, it's going to be tough. I can make it. Probably can't do a tithe anymore, but God will understand. Really. See, where do we sit with these things? What do I need to be as a follower of Jesus Christ? Paul says something really interesting in Philippians chapter 1, verse 22 through 26. He says, if I'm to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your joy in Christ Jesus will overflow on account of me. What a fascinating conversation he's having. Paul's sitting there, he's already in prison, he's thinking, okay, if I had my choice right now, what shall it be? Live, die, live, die. If I had my choice, I would die and be with Jesus right now. Now, most of us, frankly, if we were stuck with that live or die, we'd go, hey, let me be able to live here a little bit more. I get that. But it was an interesting conversation. Then in Romans 14:8, he says, if we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. Whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. I mean, this conversation's been going on in his head for a long time. But Paul has, interestingly, a little advantage. If you go back sometime and read in 2 Corinthians 12, it's a great chapter, as they all are. Paul's telling this story, and he starts out in the third person. He said, there was this man. Later on, he'll identify himself. But this man who was caught up in the third heaven. Did you ever hear that term before? Yeah. Third heaven? It's the only time it's used in the Bible. There's a couple of them. A while back, I just looked through some commentaries thinking, what's the deal there? But because the word heaven, if heavens is plural in the Bible almost 200 times throughout the Bible. And so there is multiple, but he says the third heaven. And what this commentary said made a lot of sense. The first heaven is where the birds fly. Okay? It's the sky there. The second heaven is where the stars and the galaxies and all that stuff is. The third heaven, that's the big one. That's where God is. It's interesting. I thought, we have made it to the first and second. We can fly in an airplane. Be where the birds are and even higher. We've been in spaceships. We've landed on the moon. We've already, by our own power, made it to the first and the second one. But we, by our own power, cannot make it to the third. So Paul said, he said, there was this guy, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't even know. He says, but he was caught up in the third heaven. He experienced inexpressible things. What he was witness to was mind-blowing. He got a glimpse of it, of heaven. We think, man, I'd like to see that. You got to look at Paul's life and decide, what was the cost of him seeing what he saw, hearing what he saw, what he heard. And after that, he said, to keep me from becoming conceited, as when he identifies himself, I was given this thorn in the flesh, some physical problem, so he wouldn't be prideful about what he got to see. There was a cost already. But because of that, he's saying, listen, I've sort of been there in a little bit of a way, and I got to tell you, if I had the choice, I'd be out of here today. But it's not my choice, and it's not your choice. That's God's choice. Yeah. But we've got to learn, and we've got to look, and we've got to read, and we've got to move forward to see what God is really looking at, what He's talking about. How much more it is to be with Him than it is to be with what we seem to like so much in this life. The question for you is, do you believe? Really? Really believe what God says about Him, what the Bible says about what those faithful people that have seen so much that have written to us? Do you really, really believe? There's a story in Jacob, in an Old Testament story about Jacob and Esau. They were sons of Isaac. Esau was the firstborn, and with the firstborn male comes the birthright. A bigger portion of the inheritance and the goodies that come with that. Esau was the guy. And he was a hunter, and he came back from hunting, and Jacob, his younger brother, was there making some food, and Esau said, I'm really, really hungry. And Jacob says, bring me some of the food. That's that stew you're making. Jacob says, well, sure. First, sell me your birthright. Give me your birthright, and I'll give you the food. Esau, hey man, I'm hungry anyway. What is that to me? Give it to me. So he does. He sells his birthright for a bowl of stew. What does that mean to us? The things that we want. Saving for vacation, the bigger house, the car, whatever it is I want. I'm going to move to a place where there's no disciples because I want a job. I mean, you know, I want to dress like this, like everybody else dresses. I want to go where they go because of that's what I want to do. And we will sell our birthright. And there'll be a day when it all comes clear. In Luke 18, verse 8, Jesus, talks about the Son of Man when He comes back. Will He find faith? Forget everything else. But will He find faith? This is coming up on the Christmas season, holiday season. You're familiar with this, the movie Polar Express? Yeah. Okay, most all of you have seen it, right? Yeah. It's a really cool story. And it's about this little boy living in his house, and one night a train comes cranking up his street where there's no train tracks. There's a conductor out there saying, get on the train, I got your ticket. And he's hesitant, but he gets on the train. I tell you what, when he gets on that train, the adventure begins. what he sees, where he goes. I mean, it was anything but boring, and sometimes terrifying. But he hung in there, and in time, something happened. Do you remember what he had? Remember what he found that little bell? But he couldn't hear it, right? Kept jingling around, but nothing, no sound, because you couldn't hear the ring unless you believed in Santa. But when you believed, but he had to get on the train. He had to enter into that adventure. He had to enter into all that stuff. But there, when he finally got, I mean, it was exciting. It was at times frightening and terrifying. But he stayed on that train, and then all of a sudden, at some point, all of a sudden, that ring, we hear that beautiful little ring. And the reality for us, we wanted him on that train. We wanted him in that adventure. We wanted him to go for it. We wanted to hear that bell. And when that bell was ringing, his life was magical. And the sad thing about that story is that what he says later, he narrates and he talks about later on in life, his God got busy and he grew up, and the bell went silent. You see, God wants you on that train. Boy, if you're studying the Bible right now, I got to tell you what, if you want to do this and do it right, your life will change forever, and it will be awesome. Amen. It won't be dull. But God wants you on that train. He wants you in the adventure. Yes, it'll take you places that you don't expect to go, and yes, there'll be times when it'll be uncomfortable. But the question for you and me, when's the last time you heard the bell ring? When's the last time you look at the Bible as something incredible? That it's worth giving everything up for. And probably most of us heard that ring at one time, but you know what? Life gets busy and it gets full of stuff. And that bell can go silent. We got to ask ourselves, how long has it been? That's why we moved. We've been away from our kids. We go back, we travel to get there. But it's different. But it's interesting. We're going back there. Yes, we're getting out of the full-time ministry and we're a paid position, all that kind of stuff. But we're going back to be with our kids. And I got to tell you what, our lives are planned out in a lot of ways. Our children are faithful. Our grandchildren, are starting to come around. And we want to be there to help them to understand who Jesus is and to understand how amazing this God is. And to be filled with a sense of wonder that God would care that much. And it's worth whatever we don't have to do here to have that treasure. It's an amazing thing in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, 2, and 3, it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him." Here's that statement back there in Matthew 13. In his joy, he sold everything he had. It says, Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Wow. Looking at that cross, for the joy set before him, I'll do this 100 times over. If I can have you to be loved that much, be believed in that much. Problem with too many people, they look at the Bible as a bunch of words and they don't hear the bell. They don't hear the sound. They don't see the presence of God. But you've got to get on the train first. The Bible says if you hold to my teachings, you'll know the truth. It'll set you free. But you got to go there first. That's why it's such a great example. I read this once. Freedom. We love freedom. Do what we want to do, go where we want to go. But freedom isn't doing what you want to do. There's a lot of chains that come with that kind of freedom. That freedom, real freedom, is doing what you're designed to do. Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. He says, I'll tell you what, do what I say. You're going to be fine. Amen. No matter what it looks like around you. The question then is, what about you? What do I want to leave here with? I want to see every one of those kids that I was at camp. I want to see them all in heaven. I plan to be there first. I want to be there shouting out their names. I want you there. I don't want you to get caught up in stuff that doesn't matter, that sounds so good at the time. It's about giving up the control that we love to have and turning it over to the Lord. I want to finish with a poem here. I probably read it before, maybe remember it, maybe not, but I like it, so I'm going to read it again. It's called The Road of Life. At first I saw God as my observer, my judge, keeping track of the things that I did wrong, so as to know whether I'd merited heaven or hell when I die. He was out there sort of like a president. I recognized his picture when I saw it, but I really didn't know him. But later on, when I met Jesus, it seemed as though life were rather like a bike ride. But it was a tandem bike, and I noticed that Jesus was in the back helping me pedal. I don't know exactly when it was that he suggested we change places. But life has not been the same since. When I had control, I knew the way. It was rather boring but predictable. It was the shortest distance between 2 points. But when he took the lead, he knew delightful long cuts, up mountains and through rocky places at breakneck speeds. It was all I could do to hang on. And even though it looked like madness, he just said, pedal. I was worried and anxious and asked, where are you taking me? He laughed and didn't answer. And I learned to trust. I forgot my boring life and entered into the adventure. And when I'd say I'm scared, he just leaned back and touched my hand. He took me to people with gifts. Gifts that I needed. Gifts of healing, acceptance, and joy. They gave me gifts to take on my journey, my Lord's and mine. And we were off again. And he said, give the gifts away. They're extra baggage, too much weight. So I did to the people we met. And I found that in giving, I received. And still our burden was light. I didn't trust him at first in control of my life. I thought he'd wreck it. But he knows bike secrets. He knows how to make it bend to take sharp corners, how to jump to clear high rocks, knows how to fly to short and scary passages. And I'm learning to shut up and pedal in the strangest places. And I'm beginning to enjoy the view and the cool breeze on my face with my delightful, constant companion, Jesus Christ. And when I'm sure I just can't do anymore, he just smiles and says, pedal. God bless. Thank you very much. Thank you.